So to start, imagine you want to decrease or eliminate an unwanted behavior. We've already seen some ways you can make a behavior less likely, but maybe what you want to do at the start here is just pause the video for a moment now and try and list out as many different methods as you can think of to reduce or eliminate an unwanted behavior. So one method that we've mentioned previously and we'll dive into in the next video is positive punishment. Basically, you add something aversive when they do the behavior, which means you're adding something the individual dislikes. That's what we mean by aversive. Basically, when they do the unwanted behavior, an aversive stimulus shows up, like your yelling shows up, or the spanking shows up, or you fart and make them smell it, or whatever undesirable stimulus it is, shows up when they do the behavior. You can also remove something good whenever they do the behavior, which would be negative punishment. This is the classic parenting situation of, if you use swear words, you'll lose your Xbox privileges, young lady. But then there are some strategies you might not think of, which can also lead to less of an unwanted behavior without directly being a punishment that's contingent on that behavior. For example, extinction. If a behavior was previously being reinforced, perhaps even accidentally being reinforced, like you were rewarding the class clown with attention or something like that, simply remove the reinforcement that was maintaining that behavior and the behavior may go away on its own. Unfortunately, extinction can't always solve our problems if we don't have a clear way to remove whatever is reinforcing the behavior. Like if the behavior is naturally rewarding or rewarded by some existing contingencies in the physical world without us doing anything, then maybe it's not under our control. We can't do extinction. But are there other options we haven't talked about yet in this course? Well, one would be response prevention. Basically, make the behavior difficult or impossible to perform, and the behavior will go down. For example, child-proofing is one way to decrease a toddler's behavior of opening cabinets that they're not supposed to. If the behavior becomes and stays impossible, so here's an example of response prevention. If the behavior becomes and stays impossible, obviously it's going to go down to 0, but response prevention can still work even if you can't entirely stop the behavior. Because the more difficult you make it, the less often they're able to successfully complete the behavior, then the less opportunities they'll have to get reinforced for that behavior. Like, if you lock the cookie jar, your kid will simply have fewer opportunities to get that delicious taste reinforcement for their cookie stealing or cookie eating behavior. But that's not all. We've also got some other tools in our belt that can be used to decrease an unwanted behavior. So these next few, I'm going to go through 4. These next few are a little bit counterintuitive because we're not going to decrease the unwanted behavior directly. We're going to decrease the unwanted behavior kind of indirectly by using reinforcement. So how do we do that? Well, specifically, we'll be using something called differential reinforcement. In essence, we're going to reinforce something else, reinforce kind of a healthier or more desirable pattern of behavior, such that the unwanted behavior just goes away as a side effect. I'll cover 4 types of differential reinforcement that work like this. First, there's differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, called a DRA procedure, differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. This means you reinforce an alternative behavior that allows them to get the same type of reinforcement that would normally be received by doing that unwanted behavior we're trying to get rid of. It's not just that you're reinforcing some other behavior. The key here is that you're providing an alternative way to get the same reinforcement. For example, if a child with a developmental disorder is self-harming, self-hitting, something like that, and you determine their main reinforcement for the behavior is actually attention, that's why they're doing it, they get attention when they do the behavior, then you might start to provide that same reinforcement, provide attention, when they do some alternative behavior you'd rather have them doing in that situation. Like, let them get the same reinforcement in the situation, but by doing something else. Then there's differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, or DRI for short. With DRI, you're reinforcing another behavior that is incompatible with the unwanted behavior. Like they can't possibly be doing both of them at the same time. For example, for a preschool teacher who wants to decrease running behavior during class time, he might reinforce sitting behavior. Give the kid a gold star or a treat when they're sitting. That'll make sitting more likely, and if someone is sitting, they sure can't be running at the same time. So you pick a behavior that's incompatible with one you're trying to minimize. A classic example of this was a zookeeper who kept having these big-ass birds, African crested cranes, that would land on his head. He got annoyed with it. The behavior is obviously annoying, so he wanted to decrease it. He came up with a DRI solution. He set out a mat on the ground and trained them to land on the mat in order to get a treat. He reinforced the mat landing behavior, which is incompatible with the head landing behavior. So when they came in for a landing, they were now less likely to choose his head, more likely to choose the mat. Oops. Okay. And then there's differential reinforcement of lower rates of behavior, called DRL. Here you're providing a reinforcer when the behavior occurs at a lower rate than it was before. For example, you're trying to decrease yelling behavior in a hard-to-control kid, so you come up with a DRL solution. If the kid yells less in this session than they did in the previous session, they get the candy of their choice as a reinforcer. The reinforcer is contingent not on a specific behavior, but on a rate of behavior. You're not rewarding them for yelling so much as rewarding them for adjusting their rate of yelling. And to keep getting the reinforcement, they have to do that behavior less and less and less until eventually they're not doing it much at all. Thus, you're reinforcing lower rates of behavior, DRL. Finally, there's differential reinforcement of other behaviors, DRO. Here you're giving a reward if the unwanted behavior is not performed during a designated time period. For example, you want your dog to bark less, so you come up with a DRO solution. If your dog goes 3 minutes without barking, your dog gets a treat. You could even start this one out very easy, like the dog only has to go 15 seconds without barking to get a treat. Then once it's doing that consistently, it has to go 30 seconds without barking to get the treat. Then maybe you change it to 1 minute and then 3 minutes and so on. In essence, you're kind of shaping the behavior of doing literally any other behavior than barking for a certain period of time. This one often gets confused with DRA, the differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, because alternative behavior and other behavior sound so similar. But remember, DRA means an alternative way to get the same reinforcement they would usually get from that unwanted behavior. Whereas here, you can use whatever reinforcement you want to, and what you're rewarding is not a specific new behavior, but all other behaviors that aren't the unwanted one. In other words, they'll get rewarded even if they do other crappy things, or even if they just sit on their ass the whole time and just breathe for a while. So this one, DRO, it's kind of all about time passing. So you might remember it like the O here is circular, like a clock. Imagine the O in DRO as a clock, and it might help you remember this is the one where you're counting down some time where they can't do the behavior, or else it resets that countdown timer. Okay. So we can already see a variety of ways to decrease or get rid of unwanted behaviors without specifically setting up a positive punishment contingency like yelling when they do the behavior, or a negative punishment contingency like taking away their free time when they do the behavior. That said, in our next video, we are going to dive into the details about punishment, and especially about the research that's been done on positive punishment. We'll actually see the ways to do it effectively if you are going to do it, and then after that, we'll see some of the limitations and side effects that come from using it as a tactic.